dad and me, even though he was like 10 years younger than me when he had me.
Hmm.
Um, but I do think in the last few years there have been shifts that have changed that dynamic.
Technologically, in particular.
Well, the big shift obviously is the iPhone, social media, um, but I think it is just in the last couple years it's kind of gotten the gap has grown. I don't know if it's me or if it's the culture,
Hmm.
but it seems it's a little bit harder for me, I think, to stay in the game. You know what though, kids,
Right.
I will say this, kids help you. Ironically, right? You would
they'll,
think,
they'll laugh at you when you're out of touch. And
well, that too. I mean, it's funny. I came down wearing an outfit the other day, and my wife and my son both said no, and I turned around and like, but no. But
That's
what I
great.
mean is like, you would think that being like young and single and cool would keep you young, but I think it's easier to like gradually, without noticing, become an old person that way.
Oh yeah, sure.
But when you have kids, they will tell you about the new pop culture, the new music,
Hmm.
the new app that you might otherwise like not see. They'll force you to watch the new Mark Zuckerberg, video about the new Meta site
Right.
or whatever.
Right.
So
That's why Robert Wright, born 1956, is more woke than I am because on account he's got daughters, right?
exactly,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly.
Curiosity Now listeners, thanks for being here. We're glad to have you as always. And we're really excited to welcome back a friend of the podcast, commentator extraordinaire, veteran of the cable news cycle, senior columnist for the Daily Beast, Matt Lewis. Thanks for being on Curiosity Now.
I just had a whole talk with my son about what a veteran is.
What a veteran is. Oh my gosh. Yeah. No frame of reference from his generation, I would assume.
Well, they've got Veterans Day off, I think, but
Uh-huh.
first he thought it might be about veterinarians.
Yeah.
Then I had to talk about military veterans.
Right.
But then
Well,
I had to say, like, but it's a little more complicated because, like, Tom Brady is a veteran NFL player.
yeah, then you got
So,
to get into figurative language.
yeah. So, anyway, it turned into we'll call it a teachable moment.
Yeah. Both in terms of writing and in terms of uh, history. Yeah,
I have these
I
talks all the time, and sometimes it does give me writing ideas.
oh, I bet it does. Yeah, that's another thing we were talking about. Lady and I were talking about. We have uncles, who served in Vietnam, and for whatever reason, the Forever Wars, we don't have the same visibility of veterans. I, I don't know what's going on with that.
It is interesting. I just assume that it's less, um, probably a smaller footprint, but I think
Sure, sure. No
also,
draft. That's a big thing.
yeah, yeah, I think that the draft really spread it out to like different geographical and different like economic
Mm-hmm.
strata, and I think
Right.
that the Iraq War and Afghanistan is probably much more limited to like the South and
Mm.
kind of working class. So you could be
Right.
like a blue collar uh, person and not really know very many
Mm-hmm.
veterans,
Yeah, a handful, really. Yeah. So,
which
Matt,
is
I wanted
bad,
to.
right? I mean, that's not probably not a good thing.
It probably, what that's. What makes you say that?
Well, I would assume whether you're pro, I hate to say pro war, but like whether you're pro war or anti war, it seems like a bad idea, right?
Or whether or not you think that there might be a just cause for United States military involvements.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
Because if let's say that you want a robust national defense, um, probably, if more people who have served, um, maybe helps confirm that belief. But also, I think the sacrifice part. I mean, you're going to be less likely to want to engage in some sort of boondoggle or quagmire if people you love could be involved in it, right?
Absolutely. Matt, this gets me into something that I wasn't planning on going here, but I think this is a good question. So, it used to be, if I'm going to go out on a limb, that you could sort of assume that the Democrats would be more skeptical of American military involvement, and the Republicans would be, in general, more supportive of it. Did Trump fuck that up?
I think Trump just changed all sorts of things for mostly for the worse, but I think in some cases for the better. But whatever the case may be, I think that like a lot of our assumptions about who's on which side have been turned on their ear, and I think there is a definitely a reordering that took place. And I was literally just my wife and I just went out for a walk, sort of a planning, sort of a planning meeting, scheduling meeting, and walk. It's something I recommend couples do because I think we think better when we're moving for some
Oh,
reason.
for sure, for sure.
So we went out for a walk, and I just brought up how like I think that this whole like let's go Brandon thing is kind of an irreverent pop culture thing that is it's kind of I mean it's sophomore-ish, but it's also kind of clever and a little bit cool, and it's the kind of thing I think that liberals used to do to make fun of like the man, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's like the tables have turned. I mean, like I think right now, you know, Glenn Youngkin in Virginia, we're talking like the day of this Virginia gubernatorial race, and like
Mm-hmm.
in a way, you know, Trump gave permission for people who are like because the Republican Party used to be like a religious party too, like not just
Sure.
the pro-military party, but like you know a religious party, and I think that turned off a lot of people,
Mm-hmm.
for better or worse, and Trump changed that. So now I kind of feel like the Republican Party is a little more like irreverent and like individualistic, and yes vulgar too, but the Democratic Party is kind of becoming like the party, like the I don't want to say the dad party in the sense of being respected, but like the marm, like the school marm party of like shaking their finger and telling you what to do. And you know they've got like Terry McAuliffe, the Democrat running for governor of Virginia, has like the head of the teachers union, you know, at his rally the night before the election. And Republicans are saying, let's go Brandon, you know, and like I do think things have changed.
Is that why you think that these culture war issues are so important?
Absolutely. I think that I think it's definitely about the culture war now. And like um unlike some people in my shoes, like I'm kind of a never Trump conservative, I'm a Christian conservative. I mean, I don't think if you look up the term Christian conservative in the dictionary, you would see my picture. Like, but if you just literally take those words, like that is what I am. Um, and so, but I'm not one of these people. You know, I think some people think that culture wars are completely phony, or they're just about like ginning up excitement and turning out the rubes. I disagree. I think the culture is very important, and that there really is like a culture war going on. And as much as I'm concerned about Trump, and I am, and I continue to be, I also think the left poses a very serious threat to my worldview. And honestly, you know, because we've all been pushed into this identity politics, whether we like it or not, we've been pushed into our tribe. And whether I like it or not, my tribe means I'm like a middle-aged white
Yeah,
dude who grew up rooting for a team called the Redskins
yeah.
that no longer, you know, that's been
That's your lived experience, man.
that's my lived experience. And like whether I want to be in that tribe or not, like the world, that is my identity. I'm in that tribe. And if you say, okay, which of these two evil forces, Trump or the left, poses a greater threat to people in my tribe? Well, it's probably the left if we're going to go to that level.
Right. How did Reagan play culture war, and what do you think we can learn from his strategy?
Oh, I think Reagan certainly tapped into the cultural war. I don't think Trotsky ever said you may not be in the war, but war is interested in you. But it's a true, whoever said it, it's like a true sentiment, right? Like
Hmm.
it's always with us. I think there are times when there's a greater appetite to sort of talk about, you know, I don't know, bringing in the experts to talk about what's the appropriate tax rate or what should marginal tax rates be, and having this very like sophisticated intellectual discussion. There are times when that's like, I think, more in vogue and less in vogue, but the culture of war is always kind of there, whether you want to admit it or not. Um, so I think Reagan certainly tapped into it, but I think Reagan like guided it more responsibly. He, um, I think he tapped into it. I think he used it to his benefit, but I also think at the end of the day, he led people, including his own tribe, to summon to their better angels, right? And like that's the opposite of what Trump has done. This reminds me, my one son is studying. He goes to a Christian school and he's studying like business and marketing and stuff. I mean, this is in elementary school,
Whoa.
but they're watching like TV advertisements and learning like how to be consumer. I think it's a great idea, by the way, to be a consumer of propaganda, a shrewd consumer of like,
Oh, definitely.
this is when they're bullshitting you. This is the
Yeah.
technique they're using to get you to buy this. Um, and I was telling, no, the school's telling them that all these techniques are bad. At least that's the message I think that they're taking. And I said, like, no, I have to use all these sales techniques to to sell my podcast, to sell my column. The difference is, do you really believe in your product? Like, if you sincerely believe that your product, it meets people's needs, it's going to help people, and you're actually going to get it to them, then that's different than if you're selling them a fake product, and you're just scamming them. And I think bringing it back to Reagan, I think that he did use some of the culture war and certainly benefited from it politically. But I think his motives were very pure, and his goal was to kind of use the zeitgeist, like the things that were happening in politics in the moment, but to steer it to a more positive end. So that's kind of the difference. One of the big differences between him and Trump, I would say.
For sure. And he called a lot of moderate Democrats into his side of the lever in the voting booth as well.
Yeah, his own
Um,
reordering, the
yeah,
same
yeah.
thing we're going through today in a way.
What was your first presidential election in which you voted? Was it Bush Gore?
No, way older than that, man.
You're older than that? Oh man, I had you. I thought you were in my crew. You're
Well,
you're full
I
on Gen X.
I am Gen X.
Hmm.
Of course, I present a young, cool, hip image. We know that.
So you're Bill Clinton.
Well, it's getting scary, man. I got to tell you, aging is getting. There's a time at which you can you can sort of pretend you're young. Don't look too close in the mirror as you're passing by. But at some point, the jig is up. You know what I mean? And like, and even if you're holding it together pretty well, and you start looking at Facebook and some of the people you went to school with, man, and you hit a certain age, and there's a real dichotomy. There are some people who look better now than they did back then,
Uh-huh.
and there are some people that I'm like, they're ready for the nursing home. I mean, it's a stark contrast. But whatever the case may be, now my first election, as I recall, was I think I was I think I yeah I turned so I turned 18 in September of 1992. So I don't think I could vote in the primary maybe, but I voted my my first vote was for George H.W. Bush in
Oh,
1992.
wow.
Yeah. So
That was,
I missed the Reagan years, in terms of being an adult, but I got to enjoy them as a kid.
who did he run against, Dukakis?
No, this was so he ran. So let me get my facts straight. Okay, so in '88, did I tell you '88? So in '88, Bush beat Dukakis. In
Yeah,
'92,
he ran against Clinton.
Clinton won. And
And that was the
92 was
Ross
my
Perot. Okay.
92 was my first, yeah, my first election.
Okay, well, this is great then. This is actually perfect. So I'm assuming you were not yet a columnist in 92.
Not a published one.
Not a published one, but you certainly had opinions and you were walking around telling people what they were. How did you
I did like politics. I mean, I've always liked politics, definitely.
did you think in that election, were you full in with HW, or did you feel that Perot was actually tapping into sentiments that HW was out of touch with?
No, I was full in
You're full in.
on HW, and I'll tell you, some of that had to do with the fact that I used to listen to Rush Limbaugh.
Yeah. And he was a firm supporter of HW.
Oh, he was. In fact,
Uh-huh.
he explicitly went on air multiple times and said, like, listen, people, don't be fooled by this, Ross Perot. I know there's a temptation there. This is not where you want to go. I mean, Rush was vigorously pushed back against Perot and supported Bush. And that's kind of lost to history. I mean, people might not remember that or might not even expect it based on what happened with Trump.
Do you remember what some of the arguments were?
Some of it was probably I don't, but I'm guessing some of it was electability. He's going to throw the election to Bill Clinton.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think just, there was probably a loyalty for the guy who was Reagan's vice president. Even though, we know that the Bush people and the Reagan people clashed behind, sort of, but from an average kind of normie person, it's a continuity. It's Reagan's third term. I guess in '92, it's would be Reagan's fourth term.
Right.
But
and Rush began to become a prominent personality during Reagan, so he sort of felt like he owed something to that
Bush,
presidential culture.
Bush. Here's the other thing: Bush brought in Rush Limbaugh. I mean, Rush
really.
So Rush. This is before '94. I think '94 is probably Rush's prime, his peak, when he becomes the quote majority maker with Newt Gingrich. But in the '90s, in the early '90s, George H.W. Bush invited Rush Limbaugh to the White House. Rush stayed like in the Lincoln bedroom, and even though Rush Limbaugh almost never had guests on his show, he had George H.W. Bush come on.
Fascinating.
And interviewed him, and it was basically a softball interview. So Rush was 100% behind Bush. I would say for both elections in '88, and well, I don't remember the primary. The '88 primary would be interesting to look into, right? Because you had like Pat Buchanan, I think, ran in '88. Pat Robertson ran in '88. Jack Kemp ran in '88. So I don't know where Rush was in the primary, but I would say after HW became president, Rush was a big booster of his.
You said this is too juicy for me to pass by. You said that there was some tension between the Reagan camp and the Bush camp behind the scenes.
Yeah.
What was up with that? What was that all about?
So I think what happened was, remember, George H.W. Bush ran against Reagan in '76, or Reagan ran against Bush. They ran against each other. And Bush criticized Reagan, calling his economic policy voodoo economics, famously in the Ferris Bueller's Day Off movie.
Right.
So there was some animosity originally, right? But Reagan, taps his rival to be his running mate, and takes James Baker, who was George Bush's best friend and campaign manager, and Reagan makes him his chief of staff, right? So Reagan really goes out of his way to
Oh,
patch things up and bring
wow.
yeah, it was really a magnanimity and kind of a stroke of brilliance on Reagan's part too, to be honest. But it was also very magnanimous. It wasn't revenge. It was, but at some point, Reagan becomes a lame duck, and Bush is sort of running for president
Mhm.
as he's the vice president, and he's
Yeah,
got like
right.
Lee Atwater and Ed Rollins and people who are like working ostensibly in the Reagan White House, but they're really running sub rosa. They're running the Bush for president campaign. And then remember, the Bush people are very high on loyalty. Like loyalty, the family, the Bush family, and loyalty to the Bush family is remembered and rewarded, and lack of loyalty is punished. And I think there's something cool about that, but it's also not magnanimous. And I think that
Nepotism.
the Bush people were keeping score, right? Because remember, in '88 there was this primary where there were a lot of people running, and not everyone backed Bush. And I think what happened is when Bush won in '92, I'm sorry, when Bush won in '88, and he comes in '89 as president, the Bush team basically cleaned house. They viewed Reagan's people kind of as a quote unquote deep state. So they essentially purged the Reagan loyalists from the White House and brought in their own
Oh.
loyalists. So that's the backstory.
Yeah, that's not going to set him up for success at the midterm or the second term.
There you go. There you go. I don't think that's the reason he lost, but you know, it Reagan brought in his rivals and made their success contingent on his success, right? And I think Bush did kind of the opposite, and so there was more um, infighting probably, and less, there were more rivals sort of out there stirring up trouble for him.
How did this help or hurt W and following up Jeb? Because obviously Jeb did not do very well in the last primary.
Yeah. Well, I think by the time Jeb comes along, all the rules have changed, and so I don't think it's applicable to Jeb at all. Um, with W, it's interesting, and I'm not as much of an expert on W probably as I am on 41, but W, he brings in people that some of them are Bush loyalists, but I believe Don Rumsfeld and George H.W. Bush hated each other. I think there was like
Interesting.
a real rivalry between the two of them. And as you know, W ended up pursuing a policy in Iraq that was like the opposite of 41's policy. I mean, I remember I
Mm-hmm.
was mad at George H.W. Bush for not going all the way to Baghdad and for not
Oh,
toppling Saddam. I just thought it was insane. But it turns out he was right. And
wow.
I think his son wanted to do two things that were almost opposites, or at least at odds. Like the one thing he wanted to do was avenge his father's defeat. But part of avenging his father's defeat required um, doing things differently than his father. And like Iraq was one of the things he did differently from his father. And I think that turned out to be maybe a fatal mistake.
Was Trump's cavalier attitude toward his disavowal of that war part of one of the things he did right in your
Yeah, I think it
estimation?
helped. I think it helped Bush. I'm sorry, I think it helped Trump.
Yeah, because
I
Trump
think
had
it helped
seen
Trump.
Obama had run saying it was a dumb war, being one of the sole senators who voted against it, and Trump must have seen that and said it doesn't matter what I thought at the time, I can say that it was dumb now, and that I can play that to a populist edge.
This is what makes me think that eventually, and it could take years, but eventually we'll move on from Trumpism because a ton of voters voted for Bush and supported the Iraq War and hated Cindy Shaheen and Michael Moore and called them traitors. And those same damn voters, a few years later, wanted to forget that they ever supported the Iraq War, and they wanted to vote for Donald Trump, who was saying the same stuff as Michael Moore and Cindy Shaheen.
Yeah, in a very
And
similar fashion, even just
right.
as lowbrow of a fashion as Michael Moore.
And if we ever move on from Trump, it'll be because voters do the same thing to Trump that they did to Bush, right? They're going to
Yeah.
pretend we never liked him. But yeah, I think Trump saw that even Republicans were ready to pretend that they didn't support it, and he gave them a permission structure to do that.
People think that I'm a fucking moron when I say this. Liberals think that I'm a moron when I say this, but I'm like, nobody recognizes the degree to which Obama's tenor anticipated Trump's. And the reason they can't listen to me is because Obama's a man of letters and Trump is scarcely literate. But all erudition aside, Obama had a way of using a hip, urbane tenor that could speak to illiterate people clearly, right? And get in their emotional center, right? And that's how he got a lot of lower income voters to chip in $5 here and there through the internet or whatever. And that's exactly the same playbook Trump used, period. In my
I think
opinion.
there's a lot of similarities, surprisingly. And you're right. I mean, it's a hard argument to make because temperamentally they're kind of opposites. And I do
absolutely. And rhetorically as well.
And I think that being Obama's opposite helped Trump.
Sure.
But I also think that even though stylistically they're opposites, there are threads that run. The celebritization of politics is one. And both of them, had authoritarian tendencies. I mean, Obama, remember the whole I'm not a king. I can't just come in here and willy-nilly impose my will. And then he does it with the Dreamers, the DACA thing. So, yeah, I think that I think that it's a hard argument to make, but I think you're onto something.
That time when they lost the midterms and he came in and made all those executive orders, one Stephen Bannon said, he was my hero. Stephen Bannon was like, this guy's amazing. And Stephen Bannon had no small role to play in the election of Trump. That's for sure.
And the thing is, in 94, Bill Clinton got beat, the Republican Revolution, and Bill Clinton basically listened to the voters and said, I better change. Well, when he changed, that absorbed a lot of their anger.
Yeah.
And he was rewarded not only with re-election, but even after the whole Monica Lewinsky thing, he retained a very high approval rating. But I think he really calmed. He did it by the triangulation is essentially not allowing your enemies to gain energy. It's co-opting. It's sort of absorbing their frustration and co-opting their arguments. Obama didn't do that. So the voters sent Obama a message in 2010. Hey man, pump the brakes. And if Obama had done that, I would have taken some humility, but I think it would have calmed down the political situation. The voters would have felt like, okay, I've been heard. Now I can go back to ignoring politics for a while. But Obama didn't do that.
That's another similarity between Trump and Obama, in my opinion. Humility is not a word I associate with Obama.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's just that he's got a much more perfected rhetoric, so that people are less clued into the fact that he is full of hubris.
Well, the other really frustrating thing about Obama for me was that there'd be a discussion, and he would like present the conservative side of the argument very well in a way that like illustrated that he understands us and that he appreciates the conservative argument. And then he would always, having done that, come down on a much more radical, progressive conclusion, you know? And it was a game that he played. It was a rhetorical game. And at first, like the first time you hear it, it's kind of impressive. You're like, wow, okay, we disagree, but at least he hears me. He understands our argument. But when like that's his MO, like describing our position and then explaining why it's a bad idea, and he's going to do the exact opposite. Like at some point, it actually is worse than if he just if he just did what he wanted to do anyway and
Okay,
didn't give us the lip service.
I'm going to push back on this a little bit, just because I appreciate so much about you and I love talking to you, and I know you're willing to let me do this. So to me, that's a sort of Ciceronian kind of statesman rhetoric in a way to make a play like that. And I know that your ethos is, as you kind of just described, and you got this from one of your mentors, if you believe that what you're trying to do is right, in I don't want to put words in your mouth, but to some extent the ends justify the means if you truly believe that what you're fighting for is the correct thing. So is Obama not doing that? It's just you happen to think that he's wrong.
I think I would think it's good if it was sincere.
Oh, like, now we're getting into something interesting. Oh, tell me more.
Okay, so like if he was sincerely like, conservatives say let mom and dad keep more of what they earn, and that will actually be better. But like if he was kind of thinking out loud and really giving attention to the conservative argument, and then he happened to just conclude the opposite, then I would respect that. But I think what he's doing is setting up a false premise that he's open-minded. And not only open-minded, that he's open-minded and he's willing to go wherever the facts lead him, or whoever makes the best argument. If they want to come in here and make a better argument, whatever. And I just don't believe that was ever sincere. Like, I think he had a strong progressive worldview and always kind of knew what he was going to do or what he wanted to do. And so I felt like this was a waste of time and also insincere.
Fair enough. Good analysis. Let's talk about the Daily Caller. You used to work there, right? Co-founder Tucker Carlson.
Yeah.
What was that experience? Man. What was that experience like for you?
It was awesome. I loved it. It was one of, if not the most fun job I ever had.
Tell me more. What made it so?
It was full of exciting, kind of like young people who like this was their first rodeo. They weren't beaten down by the world. They had they were kind of wide-eyed. So I got to, I was in my 30s, and the average person there was probably like 24 or something. This is like the first job they had out of college. So I got to sort of fulfill the role of being like a veteran ball player, like you get to go out to the ballpark every day and have fun playing the children's game, but you also get to mentor, mostly by example, but sometimes explicitly, young journalists. And it was also there was a kind of an environment of fun and creativity that was fostered by Tucker and Neil Patel, his partner, where they wanted to create an office environment that was fun and also kind of rebellious and irreverent.
Hmm.
And so um, it was a it was a great time. And I think, it's just like SNL. Saturday Night Live has their everyone feels like there's sort of a golden era.
Hmm.
And there were seasons that were better and seasons that were bad. And I feel like it probably over time, uh, as Trump emerged, became a less fun environment. But I started there in like 2010, 2011, something like that. And it was just a super, super fun place to be.
Yeah, it sounds exciting.
Yeah.
But I, I don't want to speak in too broad of brushstrokes, but people associate Tucker with a sort of rise in populism in the Republican Party. And first, I guess, correct me if I'm wrong on that. But secondly, I'd like to know, to what extent did he try to impose that tenor editorially on the writers?
Um, I think that, yeah, Tucker, ever since I worked for him, and now we're talking 10, 10, 12 years ago when I started working for him, has always had this populist nationalist vibe to his politics. Now, if you want to go back 25 years ago, you'll find his writing at like the Wall Street Journal being very different. I mean, he used to be more of a libertarian and kind of an open border sort of guy. But I guess my point here is like he's not a Johnny come lately who just hopped on the bandwagon after Trump.
Sure,
There-
sure.
So whether you like his politics or not, they're pretty consistent.
Hmm.
But the cool thing is he didn't impose it. And he paid me for 6 years to write things that went 180 degrees against his brand of politics.
Oh, do you have any stories about examples where you really wrote something that you thought might get knocked down, but nevertheless found the page?
No, because I never thought because I never thought he would knock anything down because
Oh, that's
you have to
awesome.
understand his ethos is like everything is permissible. I mean, to the degree that the caller like was problematic, it's problematic because they didn't impose standards or or a vision. It was like do what you want to do. Like that was the philosophy was do what you want to do. And that can lead you some dark places, but if you're me, it was incredibly freeing and liberating and I was nothing but encouraged to do it. And you got to realize, I mean, when I was there too, it was, I ended up working, I had colleagues like Jamie Weinstein, who was a prominent never Trumper who voted for Hillary. His wife, Michelle Fields, is the woman who was famously pushed down by Corey Lewandowski. We had one of my other colleagues there was Alexis Levinson, who went on to write for like BuzzFeed and Roll Call. I mean, it was a very diverse group of young people, and some of them went to places like Breitbart, and some of them went to places like Vanity Fair or CNN. Caitlin Collins, who's now a big star at CNN, she used to do slideshows of Kate Upton, for the Daily Caller. I mean, it was just a weird, fun, great place to be, especially in the early days. But to answer your question, like I never worried because I never had a reason to. The message always was do what you want, do what you want to do, and as long as you're being honest, like if you lied about something or did bad journalism or something, that might be different. But as long as I was an opinion writer, and so let your freak flag fly was kind of the message.
Compare and contrast that Daily Caller with Breitbart. I think you maybe already have, like through insinuation, but what's going on with some of the newer Republican media? And I don't want to get into the new social networks, but what did Breitbart change?
Well, I think part of what Breitbart changed was part of what they changed was the ethos of do what you want to do. We're going to hire people who are, the caller was like, we're going to hire people who are like sort of conservative, interesting, weird, interesting people. And like, basically we're going to give, and look, I'm making fun of myself here when I say this, but it's like, we're going to give monkeys, paints, a paint set, and someone's going to paint, you know, uh, you know, Mozart, or not Mozart, he's a musician, but like, someone's going to do like a great, I don't know, Van Gogh, or who knows, like whatever. Someone's going to do something brilliant, and there's going to be a mistake, but there'll be there'll be some sloppiness, there'll be mistakes made. That was sort of the caller's ethos. I think with Breitbart, there was, in a way, it was, and I never worked there, but I feel like it was less fun because there was a brand. Like the brand was, we're gonna be the pro-Trump site, and we are gonna. So then now you're not in like, what was it? Orwell said journalism is print. Journalism's printing something that someone else doesn't want you to print, right? Otherwise, it's propaganda. And I think with
Hmm.
Breitbart, it became more of like an organ of the kind of Jeff Sessions populist nationalist MAGA movement, where like they were kind of creating widgets. That's not fun. That's not what I signed up for. They're churning out stuff that has an agenda, because they're activists and they want to advance a certain worldview. It's not art. It's not creative. It's certainly not journalism. But that's part of it. The other thing that's like less obvious but problematic that Breitbart introduced in the journalism world, was these contracts. Like instead of paying people a salary, I think uh, they started signing people to these like contracts, and they had like non-defamation agreements or whatever, and also non-compete. I think the main thing was like a non-compete clause. So
Hmm.
you kind
Wow.
of, they pay people a lot of money, but you kind of get locked into it. So I feel like, and again, I never worked there, so I could be wrong about some of the details, but like I felt like they actually took away some of the like the romance and fun of being in this business.
That's a sad thing,
Yeah.
especially when it becomes a propagandistic mouthpiece for a president. That's especially troubling. Um, this is going to be kind of a hard turn, but I wanted to talk to it. I'm mindful of your time. So you've been writing some things that support people like Liz Cheney and people who stand up against the Stop the Steal nonsense, and I'm interested because Liz Cheney, obviously, her father was the Veep for W, and I wonder, to what extent are you fighting an uphill battle on that? Because not because the cause isn't just, but because some of the resistance to Trumpism is still seen as a remnant of Bush dynasty legacy.
Hmm.
Is that a thing, or am I imagining that?
Oh, I think you're probably right. The thing to know though about me is like I don't, I can't let that factor into my writing. You know what I mean?
Because
I
you got to
mean,
keep pure in terms of ideas and critical thinking.
well, yeah, and I mean it's a weird thing to say, right? Because sometimes I'm literally writing analysis, and that analysis would include being honest about what you just said, right?
Sure, sure.
Um, but I don't view myself as trying to fix the Republican Party,
Aha.
um, at least not as my primary goal. And if it all falls apart, I just want to be able to look back and say like, wow, Matt Lewis wrote some good stuff. He wrote some interesting stuff, and it had integrity. Um, and he was right about a lot of stuff. Not everything, but he was right about a lot of stuff. He was a good writer. He was a good analyst, um, and he was on the right side as he
Yeah.
saw it. And like, if I can do that, then I can't control the world. Like, I can't control the Republican Party. I can't control the voters. I can only control, and I can't even control me all the time.
Right.
But I only have
I
a
feel you,
chance.
brother.
This is the only thing I have a chance to control, so that's what I want to focus
I feel you.
on.
But so is it? I guess I'm trying to get an idea. So yeah, so I mean, you're aligned with like a cluster of what I would, from my biased perspective, consider legitimate and honest journalists, so the people of the Dispatch and the Remnant, these sorts of people. To some extent, the Bulwark, possibly, and to what? So like, what do you think? What do you think the fighting chances that you guys have when you got the Emperor wanting to strike back in this next election? I mean, are you like a kind of outside of the Empire versus the Rebel Alliance at this point in your sort of own galaxy, or do you think that you might be able to win some hearts and minds within the GOP?
So, I mean, I want to be helpful if I can to, the good team. Whoever I think is on the side of the Angels, who I want to just generally be helpful to that side.
Yeah.
But that's not really what I see my purpose as. I mean, I'm not a team player. I'm just not. I don't. This is part of the reason I didn't. This is part of the reason I didn't fall prey to Trump, to be honest. Because if you're a team player and you're a Republican,
Yeah,
you get on the Trump bandwagon. That's our
yeah.
team now, right?
It's like, I get it. He sucks. Suck it up. Deal with it. He's the boss. This is what we're doing. Yeah.
So like, if I wanted to join a team, that would have been it. I'm not a team player. I don't have like team spirit. I don't like fraternities and sororities. And so like, the odds, if I don't like teams, I'm not going to join the Never Trump team. I mean, I just don't like teams. I mean,
fair enough.
I'm going to try, when I can.
You associate yourself with those writers because you think they're good thinkers and writers.
Exactly. And I mean, look, this is an area where I try to, like, I'm an individualist, but I also realize that, like, joy comes from community. So,
Sure.
So, like, I forced myself to coach a Little League baseball team, and I had a blast. It was my kids' team. I'm not a weirdo, but I coached Little League baseball team, and like I go to church physically. I go to church, and I force myself to do things that I don't necessarily always want to do because I believe that it's important to be involved in things and to have community. But having said that, while I will certainly try to help out the side that I think is right, at the end of the day, I think of myself as a professional writer who's like kind of chronicling and documenting a bunch of weird shit that's happening in America right now. And like, that is my job. That's what I get paid to do. And I'm going to say what I believe and I'm going to say who I think's right. But like, I'm not going to let whether they have a chance to win or whether the deck is stacked against them, like, influence, I'm going to try to not let that influence my analysis.
Everybody, you heard it here. A man with the mission, Matt Lewis. You can read his columns at the Daily Beast. You can catch him on the DMZ, on the Blogging Heads Network on YouTube with Bill Scher, where they do a little left-right political analysis and some mighty fine analysis, I might add. Listeners, if you celebrate, we are recording this on All Souls Day, and so a blessed day to you. Otherwise, Matt, is there anything else you want anybody to know about, anything you're working on?
Yeah, I would love people to check out my YouTube page. This is my new thing. It's youtube.com/Matt Lewis. And I'm doing these kind of conversations, Aaron, with different people like Stephen Hayes from the Dispatch, Glenn Greenwald. I talked to Rod Dreher. And so it's a lot of, not all of them, but a lot of the conversations are with people who are helping me understand the reordering that's happening and the way that politics is changing. And like, it's a way to, like, literally I'm trying to figure this out myself. And so it's therapeutic and cathartic to talk about it as the guest and also to interview and talk to other people who have different insights and experiences. So check out that YouTube page.
You said youtube.com/Matt Lewis.
You got it.
Make sure to subscribe to that, everybody. Like the videos that you like and comment on them. And be sure you sign up for his notifications as well. And while you're at it, do the same thing for Curiosity Now. I'd appreciate that. Matt, it is always a blast to talk to you. I'm super grateful for you taking the time and for offering your insight.
Hey, man, it was a blast. My pleasure.